Are we good? Did you did you represent God well to the creation this week? Did you? Did you present God to the creation? We were talking about what it means to be the image of God and how that's representing God to the created order. And so that's what we are. So here's a question, all of you images that I have for you. I want you to think about a time. I want you to think about a time when you were done. Think about a time when you felt done. Now, when I say that, I don't mean the kind of done where it's like I quit kind of done, like I am so done with this and we throw it in the garbage, or I am so done with you and I break up a relationship, or I'm so done with this job and I quit. I don't mean that kind of done. I mean the kind of done like it's like the accomplished kind of done. Like, I'm done. The admiring of the achievement kind of done. Like, think about a time when you felt that kind of done. And here's the question I want to ask. What did you do next? What did you do next? What follows being done? So I want to speculate on a couple of different kinds of answers that we might get. Like, some of you are like, well, I'm never done. Right? That's the problem. I'm never done. There's always something more to do. Or some of you would be like, well, when I'm done with one thing, like I just move on to the next thing. I finish one project and I go on to the next project. Or are there like some of you that when you're done, you could say, well, when I'm done, I get to enjoy what I've accomplished. I get to make use of what I've been working on, and now I'm done. Like being done with my project, like if I'm working on a project, being done with my project is actually the beginning. It's not the end. Being done is the beginning. It's the beginning of its existence. It's the beginning of its use. It's when I can actually put it to use. It's when not the work of the doing, but the work of the being. That's when it actually begins. So, like for example, I build a barn, and when I'm done, I can put my animals in it, and they would have a place of shelter. Or I can put my equipment in it, or I bake some bread, and it's done. And when it's done, I get to slice it while it's warm and serve it to who's ever in the house and spread some butter on it and watch it melt and begin to eat. Like, how awesome is that? When I'm built cabinets or I sewed a dress, or I rebuilt an engine, or I planted a garden, or I wrote a story. When I'm done, I get to rearrange my kitchen. When I'm done, I get to slip it on and wear the dress to a special event. When the engine is done, I get to put it in the car and rev it up and take off. When the garden is done, I get to grow food and harvest food. When the story is written, I get to read it and enjoy it and to pass it on. When you're done, it's like it's just the beginning. So I'll ask it again. When you feel done, what did you do next? Like for you, what follows done? So what we're looking at today is what followed done for God. What we're looking at today is the seventh day. The seventh day. And so what I want to, and before I read it, this is what I want to make sure you're going to get today. To be done, in the biblical sense, is to occupy. That when God is done on the seventh day is to live in. God lives in the seventh day. He occupies the seventh day. The seventh day is to flourish in. The seventh day is for images of God like us to exercise our representing God in creation. For God, the seventh day, to occupy it, to fill it up, is to begin his reign, his rule over all the created order. So let's open up our Bibles and take a look, because we're staying close to the text, are we not? Like, we are reading the text, we're staying close to the text, we're taking a look at what the text says, and then thinking through what that actually means for us, all right? So I'm going to pick up right at the very last verse of Genesis chapter 1. You know, we kid around about Genesis 1 not being hard to find, but it actually is, isn't it? Like, your Bible's got all those introductory first pages and stuff, and it's really hard to get. Oh, but if you put a marker in it, it's easier. All right, so here we go. If you got your Bible, let's take a look at it. So chapter 1, verse 31. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Chapter 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had done, and he rested. He rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. Now, like, you can circle and underline or just plant in your brain that word rested. But hopefully, before the morning's over, what you're going to see is rested might mean more, might contain more than you thought before. Because here's a hint. It doesn't mean laying on your couch this afternoon and watching the Steelers try to best the Browns. That is not what it will mean, okay? He rested on the seventh day from all the work he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created. In the seventh day, God rests. The seventh day, God occupies his creation. So what I want us to do here is to get a richer idea of what's going on with the seventh day is let's kind of distinguish what makes it different from days 1 through 6. Because it's clearly different, is it not? Like, days 1 through 6 follow a particular pattern. The seventh day breaks. So let's kind of compare them, and we'll see what the differences are and how that might be a clue to what God is sharing with us and laying out for us on the seventh day. So in days 1 through 6, when you take a look at what God does, like, look at all of the different verbs that are used in days 1 through 6, all the different verbs that are attached to God that describe God's actions, all right? So here's all the verbs. Some of them are used more than once, but here's all the verbs that are used of God, God's actions in days 1 through 6. God created, God said, God called, God separated, God made, God saw, God set, God blessed. So in all of this, in all of these actions of God, what he's been doing, remember, is bringing order to the chaos. So the creations of the land and the sky, the creations of the heaven and earth, started out with this watery nothingness, this watery darkness and chaos. And when God went to work, he was bringing order to the chaos. And so the first things he did, you remember, is he was making habitations, right? He made the sky, he made the sea, he made the land, he made time. He's making habitations, and then days 4 through 6, he's filling up these habitations with the things that are going to be within it. So that's what God's doing in days 1 through 6. It's very busy, it's very active, and things are coming together. Things are being prepared for the end of that sixth day when he creates his images to reign in the world as his representatives. And then day 7 comes. Here's the verbs that are ascribed to God in day 7. There's fewer, and they're more passive than the active type verbs in 1 through 6. On the seventh day, the verbs are finished, ceased, blessed, hallowed. Those are pretty good words. And very different, yes? But they're good words, like finished. God finished. Not the next time you see that word in the Bible, but a really big time when you see that word in the Bible is when? Yeah, right. So Jesus is on the cross. It is finished. That's the end of the 6th day. And on the 7th day, he rests. He's in the grave. And when there's like this 8th day, he rises again. And that goes on in perpetuity, right? Like he rises, he ascends, he sits at the right hand of God the Father from where he reigns. Like that day never ends. The day of the resurrection never ends. It just goes on and on. That's a clue. That's a hint for what's coming here. Then there's the word ceased. Okay, so ceased, this is where we get the word Sabbath. And you know what? It's not a complicated word. It just means stop. Like you got to stop. Every once in a while, you just have to stop. And God did. He stopped. And he said, you should try it. It's pretty good. Like you should just give it a go. Because if God can do it, you can do it. Then there was the word blessed. God blessed. Now, we might not know what this word means if it weren't for what it meant in chapter 1. So in chapter 1, whenever he blessed something, it followed up with, be fruitful, multiply, fill. So for the 7th day to be blessed speaks to the days, now I want you to think for a minute here, speaks to the day's fruitfulness. For it's being full of good. That's blessed is to just pronounce good. To bless is, it's full of good. How about this word? To bless is, it's bountiful. God blessed the 7th day, and it was bountiful. I think that's another hint. You know what comes next in the story? Yeah, right? There was a garden in Eden. Oh. Fruitful. Good. Bountiful. Like Eden is a part of that 7th day. It's not next week. Eden, or the garden that's in Eden, it's a part of that 7th day. Fruitful, good, and bountiful. And then there's the word hallowed. Now, for us, we probably only use the word hallowed when we say the Lord's Prayer, right? Our Father who art in heaven, and then sometimes we say hallowed. Hallowed. Whoever started that? Hallowed is, some of your translations might say God called it holy or sanctified. There's not a hair's breadth of difference in those words. Hallowed, sanctified, made holy. Same word. We just have lots of different ways to say it, which sometimes it works the other way around. So God. So here's another really good word. He made that day sacred. Like it is sacred time. This day is sacred. This day is holy. Okay, so that leads to another difference. So there's these two big differences between days 1 through 6 and day 7, right? So the first one was just all the different kinds of verbs that are used. And days 1 through 6, you know this already, right? Days 1 through 6, they all end with this phrase. There was evening and there was morning, day 1. There was evening and there was morning, day 2. There was evening and there was morning, day 3, 4, 5, 6. There was evening and there was morning. In day 7, those words are not there. There's no evening and morning in day 7. What do you think about that? Like, what do you think about that? You know what I think? I think that in the created order, before before the rebellion of humanity, before sin entered the world, and there was the fall and the curse. Before that, the seventh day was was just to continue on. Like Adam and Eve's first day wasn't Monday. Like it wasn't wake up and go to work day. Adam and Eve's first day was the seventh day. And I think the seventh day was to continue. I don't think, when Adam and Eve were in the garden, like they did receive instructions, right? Like they were to care for the garden and work the garden. We're going to be talking about that probably next week. There was activity. Like again, it wasn't laying on the couch and watching the football game day off. There was activity, but it was fruitful, bountiful, purposeful, meaningful activity. Work didn't become like work with the sweat of our brow until after sin and the fall. So in chapter 3 in Genesis, you hit. Oh man, you guys really messed up. Everything will come by the sweat of your brow. Work will be what we recognize now as work. But in the seventh day, in Eden, work the garden, care for the garden. There was Adam and Eve taking up the intended role of them having been created as God images. They were taking up their role as God images to oversee the creation, to rule within the creation, remember what we said last week, to take the good creation and make it better. And that's what they were working on in the garden, working as God's partners in the created order. And so the seventh day, I think just was meant to continue on in perpetuity. I have another reason for thinking that, because in the new heaven and the new earth that we're going to discover in Revelation 21 and 22, that's exactly what happens. The seventh day, so the writer of the Hebrews is going to say, there remains a Sabbath rest. There remains a seventh day for the people of God. Right there does. That seventh day that remains for the people of God is the new heaven and the new earth and the new Jerusalem and the garden that's in the city. And, it's just awesome. So I think what's going on in the seventh day here, in Genesis beginning chapter 2, is it was to continue on. Sacred time, sacred space. Like I know it's just a hint. There's just a hint. The Bible is always, it's so beautiful the way the Bible does this. The Bible is always looking forward and looking back. It's always looking forward and looking back. So right here in this particular instance, in Genesis chapter 2, there's this hint of the temple. Like this is temple talk. This is temple talk. The temple was sacred space. And the temple was entered into at sacred times. But what if, and this is what the text will teach us, what if all of creation is the temple? Well, what if the seventh day goes on in perpetuity? Then we are always in sacred time, and we're always walking on sacred space. Like if it were always the seventh day and we enjoyed creation as the temple, then this division, so this is the way we live our lives out. We live our lives out with this division between here's the sacred and here's the secular. Sunday's God's day. The other day is for me to do all these other worldly, secular kind of things. But in Genesis chapter 2, no, those two are the same. It's the seventh day. The creation is always the temple. It's always sacred time. It's always sacred space. So this division between that which is sacred and secular is exposed for what it is, which is to say artificial. It's an artificial division. One of the most difficult tasks, I think, for us as Christians, as followers of Jesus, is to not live in the secular time or space as if it weren't sacred. because it was intended to be. And we're trying to live into the space that God created. So, so that comes out more fully. But the hint of that is there. So, in preparation for this series, there's just so much that I've read. And I love doing this. Like, I love to read and prepare. And so, like, if you were to go in my den at my house, you would see, like, these couple stacks of books that are all about things going on in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. But you know what I discovered? And you probably already knew this. You probably already knew this and didn't know that you knew it. But do you know the best commentary on Genesis 1 and Genesis 2? Somebody said something. Do you know, what? Oh, yeah, cheaters, that's who. The best commentary on Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 is the book of Psalms. Oh, you've got that. And you've noticed this before, right? Like when you've read Psalms before, you've noticed, wow, man, the Psalms talk a lot about creation. Right, they do. The psalmist is providing us commentary on Genesis 1 and 2, reflecting on it, telling us what it meant. So Psalms 132 is one of those. So your bulletin says Psalm 138. It's not. I had Psalm 138 on the brain. I was reading Psalm 138 in my personal devotions, and verse 8 of Psalm 132 is an important one for us. So I wrote down 138, and Sherry printed it the way I wrote it. And so there it is in your bulletin, wrong. So you should just put down Psalm 132. So in Psalm 132, the psalmist gives us commentary on the seventh day. So here's the thing. Again, remember, not just translating words, but translating worlds. The Hebrews had two different kinds of rest. They thought about rest in two different ways, and we find them both in Psalm 132. So look at verses 3, 4, and 5. There they are. So these are like the psalm. The writer in this particular psalm is kind of putting words backwards into David's mouth. So David is Israel's not the first king, but second king, but greatest king, and David wanted to build a temple for God. A sacred space where God could dwell. But God won't let him build this temple. And so David does everything but. Like, he designs it, he raises money for it, and then, which was easier for David than it's been for us. So now I lost where I was. So he turns it over to Solomon to do the building. But the psalmist in 132 shows us David's heart. I will not enter my house or get into my bed. I will not give sleep to my eyes or slumber to my eyelids until I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling place for the mighty one of Jacob. I will not cease. This is the kind of rest that we're talking about here in verses 2, 3, and 4, right? Like, I'm not going to rest. I'm not going to stop. So one of the words for rest in the Hebrew mind is just to stop. I'm not going to stop, says David. I'm not going to rest. I'm not going to close my eyes. I'm not going to lay down on my bed until I get this temple built. Okay, let's look at verse 8 then. A different kind of rest. When I get this temple built, then the prayer becomes, rise up, O Lord, and go to your resting place. You and the ark of your might. Arise, O Lord. Arise to your rest. Rise up, O Lord, and go to your resting place. Look, he's not telling God it's bedtime. He's not telling God the Sabbath has begun. Like this, the idea here of the resting place is to occupy. That's the word you need to get. To arise to your resting place is to occupy. I'm going to build this temple for you, or someone's going to build this temple for you, and I want you to occupy it. So like when the temple was built and when the tabernacle was built, at the moments of their consecration, it was said that the presence of God filled that place. That's the arising to your rest. God, occupy your temple. Take up this place from which you will reign over your people. The temple in Genesis 1 and 2 is God's creation. And the seventh day is the day of rest. It's the day that God occupies his creation. He doesn't just cease from activity. He occupies his creation. He arises to his place of rest. My brother likes to rub this in a lot, and maybe others of you can relate to him. My brother's retired. He's been retired for as long as he's been alive, it seems like. But he says, every day is Saturday. Every day is Saturday. That's not what God's going for at all. To be done, remember we said at the very beginning, to be done is just to be beginning. Right? And that's where God's at. It was finished. Now we're just getting started. Now we're just beginning here. So, here's another instance where this is true. So in the book of Hebrews, remember how the book of Hebrews, if you've read Hebrews recently, you might recall it. There's a portion in the book of Hebrews where the writer says there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. But he talks about how the Israelites, when they first came out of Egypt and they're going through the wilderness wanderings, that it says they failed to enter into their rest. What's he talking about? So, I'll tell you, since you ask. They come right to the verge of Canaan. They come right to the verge of the promised land. Not after 40 years, like when they were still taking a kind of a more direct route. And so they come to the edge of Canaan, and they're unfaithful to God. They don't trust God. They don't believe God. They're afraid of what's in there. They're afraid of what God has planned for them. Ooh, there's a really good lesson in there. They're afraid of what God has planned for them. And so what God has done, this is important stuff. What God has done in the promised land is he's prepared it for them. It's ready for them. Imagine if somebody bought you a house and it was done, it was furnished. The refrigerator was stocked. There were dishes in the cabinet. There was nice furniture in the living room. There was a television that worked. It was ready for you just to walk in and occupy. That was Canaan. This is the way the Bible describes it. That God prepared it for them. They weren't the Israelites weren't like American frontiersmen. They weren't like Daniel Boone. They weren't cutting down trees and clearing places and building homes and establishing cities. None of that. Canaan was ready for them. The promised land was ready for them, but they didn't believe God, and they failed to enter into their rest. That's the way the Bible says it. They failed to occupy what God had provided for them. Now, were they just supposed to go in there and lounge around? No, that wasn't it at all. But it was ready for them to go, ready for them to have at it. They didn't have to build one thing. So kings in these days, they would go to war. They would fight, and they would conquer, and then they would rise to their rest. Again, they were done, but they were just getting started. Because now their rule would begin. Now that they had accomplished the defeat of their enemies, which is what God did for 6 days, right? God is creating against the disorder and the chaos and establishing it, and there it is. God conquers the chaos. He brings order and purpose, and then he occupies. The seventh day is the beginning of God's rule. It's like his coronation. Now, in a very short moment, not today, but in the text, in a very short moment in the text, humanity is going to rebel against this. And they're going to take matters into their own hand. And that'll throw us back in to the chaos, much like we experience today. Do we experience chaos today? Yes. Do we experience darkness today? Yes. Why do we? What happened to the seventh day? Well, we rebelled against the rule of God. And we threw creation back into the darkness and back into the chaos. And ever since then, God has been working to reestablish his order. And in Revelation 21 and 22, he'll be finished again with a new heaven and a new earth. That's right. All right, so I want to show you a picture here. This is what we're going to wrap up with. This is, I'll go to the first one so we get a better idea. All right, so this is Hearst Castle. Hearst Castle. Hearst Castle is along the California coastline in San Simeon. It's about 250 miles north of Los Angeles. I visited there a few times. And so it was built by William Randolph Hearst. Now, William Randolph Hearst, if you don't know that name at all, he was like a combination of Mark Zuckerberg and Rupert Murdoch, all right? So he was this, in the early parts of the 20th century, he was this big media mogul. He owned like 36 newspapers and all kinds of other media outlets. And actually, I said he was like Rupert Murdoch and Mark Zuckerberg combined. He actually had more direct influence than either one of those guys. Like he could directly make or break you, depending on what he chose. So he's an extremely wealthy man, and so his family. Go ahead to the next picture. His family owned this land in San Simeon. Everywhere you see, everything you see right there, his family owned, but it was not developed at all. It was wild and waste. It was darkness and chaos. And he goes in and he's going to bring order to it. He's going to create a castle. And the castle that he wants to create, he wants it to approximate some of the finest, richest, most beautiful castles that he's seen in Europe. And so in 1919, he begins to work on it. He begins. Work stopped in 1947. So that's like 38 years. Now I say work stopped because they were never actually done. It's not, he never had a moment where he could say, it's finished. But they stopped work in 1947. He lived there many of the years while it was being constructed. He spent, so it seems, upwards of $10 million building all the structures that are around it, which, as much as I can calculate, comes to about $700 million in today's dollars. It is a temple to Mammon, right? It is. It's a temple to greed and to power and to money and to pleasure. For $700 million, he got to entertain people there for about 13 years. That was all. And when all the construction crews left in 47, he lived there for about 2 more years. And then he had to leave. 2 years to occupy, to enjoy. There's a futility, a frustration in never being done, and never having the seventh day. The seventh day is to occupy and to flourish. William Randolph Hearst didn't really ever get to occupy. George Bernard Shaw said that this is what God would have built if he had the money. Sounds a little blasphemous, doesn't it? Kind of reminds me of Psalm 2. Like, why do the nations rage and the people plot in vain? God laughs from his throne in heaven. At least God finished, right? At least God was done. You can lose it there, John, the picture. Some people think that God created the world and then just let it go spinning off on its own. Some people think that God has really no use for the world, and that at the end of all things, God's intention is to trash it, and we would be ejected before the trashing. So neither one of those things do I find in the biblical text. God's intent is on renewing his creation. God's intent is to redeem his creation. Like, I know when John 3:16, for God so loved the world, like, okay, he just means all the people of the world. Maybe I'm starting to rethink that a little bit. Maybe he really does love his creation, yeah? Maybe he does love his world. Maybe his intention isn't to trash it, but to restore it, to make it new. A new heaven and a new earth and a new city with a garden in the middle of it, that we could have our seventh day to flourish, to be fruitful, to see the bounty. I want to say that if you just take an honest reading of Scripture, one of the things you're going to find is that it's always God's intent, it's always been God's intent to dwell with his people. Like we sing that song, right? What's the name of that song? No, thanks so, Betty. That's a different generation song. What's that? Is he worthy? Right. So we sing this song, Is He Worthy, where we ask questions and have antiphonal answers. And one of the questions we sing is, does our God intend to dwell again with us? And the antiphonal answer is, he does. He does. Friends, what I want us to try to figure out, and like you need to do this work, the seventh day is about hope for the created order, hope for the darkness and the chaos that we find ourselves in, that God is moving us, renewing the image of God in us, and working to renew the created order and to bring the new heaven and the new earth and the new city. That's the seventh day. That's good news, folks. This is good news. I want to say, this is the story that matters, all right? This is the story that matters. Like God is, the text, the scriptures share this hope, and we are the repositories of that hope. Is that the right word? Like that, we hold that hope. We carry that hope. And everywhere we go, like wherever days 1 through 6 take you, okay, wherever days 1 through 6 take you, you carry in you the seventh day. I love that. Everywhere you go, days 1 through 6, you carry within you the seventh day. And you are living into the seventh day. Whatever the seventh day is going to be like, I'm living that way now. And I take this hope that's been deposited in me, and I share it with a broken, burned out creation that's looking to be renewed. You know it's true. You know it's true. I'm not asking you to engage in this prolific war. I'm asking you to engage in this prolific healing that God is bringing, moving toward the seventh day. That's where we live. That's where we live.